Welcome, everyone. This is SatiSeva. My name is Julia. I'm one of the facilitators in our beautiful community. I want you to know that SatiSeva is a practice of reimagining recovery and support. This is an affinity group associated with Recovery Dharma, and we have created a practice of 16 mindfulness practices that have been geared toward issues related to recovery and supporting people on that journey. Lo and I published a book in September where we've decided to say, I wrote the book and Lo made it happen. And that is absolutely true. It really is. It's so true. So here's our beautiful book. One of our Sangha members who's here today helped me with this design. Just amazing. And so, what we've been doing for the past handful of weeks is reading from the very beginning. And we've been exploring the first chapter of this book, which is the mindfulness practice of awareness. The SatiSeva practice begins with awareness as a spiritual practice. There are 5 spiritual practices. There are 4 body practices, and there are 7 mind practices. And it begins with awareness, because without awareness, we are unmoored, untethered, and we are just reacting to life. Whatever comes up, we react to it. And whatever is yielded from that reaction, we continue to react. And it is only when we experience awareness that we can pause or at least slow down the whole momentum of our reactivity and begin to exercise a little bit of curiosity. Awareness is the foundation upon which we can stand and grow. So today, I'd like to share with you, we're at the very end of this chapter, and each chapter ends with a review of the instruments of peace that we've explored together and a mindfulness meditation. There are 2 instruments of peace that define the mindfulness practice and cultivation of awareness. And those 2 instruments are, would you look at that? That mantra said that way. Would you look at that? It's such a curious inquiry, isn't it? Something arises, some thought, some reactivity, some feeling, and rather than get hooked by it, rather than go with it, we take a moment, we take a second and just say, wow, would you look at that? That is guaranteed to slow you down. It certainly slows me down. And not only that, but whenever I ask myself that question, wow, or make that exclamation, wow, Julia, would you look at that? It immediately infuses the situation with a drop of curiosity. I'm uncomfortable. Look at that. I'm annoyed. I am blissed out. I am grateful. I'm overwhelmed. Would you look at that? And then that begins to open up, what are the possibilities defining this feeling, this experience I'm having? Yesterday, I took a beekeeping class all day long. I know, I'm beside myself, no pun intended. And I found myself several times saying, wow, would you look at that? I was listening to a scientist try to convince me that bees have no feelings, have no consciousness. They're just these fuzzy little creatures that do what they do. And I was like, look at that. Look at that belief. And look at how I don't believe that at all. There it is. Okay. The second instrument of peace is a spiritual concept called second arrows. And I want to read for you what's in this book on how I define second arrows as I outline instruments of peace. Second arrows happen quickly and unexpectedly. There are times when people are so bewildered by the conditions bringing a barrage of arrows, they can't pull them out fast enough to tend to their own wounding. Take your time and be patient with yourself. This is a profound practice that uncovers deep layers as you go. The most important aspect of noticing second arrows is the invitation to truly be kind to yourself. Learning to shift away from hostility and aggression is a monumental practice all by itself. Perhaps the most humbling realization is seeing how common this is. We've become so accustomed to small, insidious jabs and digs that they often go unnoticed. These seemingly harmless little insults, whether offered as a joke or not, can be as sharp and piercing as an iron arrowhead. Working with this instrument of peace is an intentional act of setting down weapons of inner warfare that hinder our ability to nurture our own humanity. Earlier in this chapter, I define a second arrow, and that is we make a mistake. Let's say we're interacting with someone and we say something unskillful, like something like, would you just shut up? It sounds weird coming out of me, right? Like I would never say that, but thank you for your pouty face. I know it's terrible, right? But imagine people say that. People think that. Okay. So let's say we don't actually say it. We just think it. Oh God, would you just shut up? It's aggressive thought. It's a violent thought that we have. And we don't have to tell anybody about it because it's in the mind. It's just a thought, right? So the first arrow is noticing, ooh, ow, God, that was aggressive. That was hostile. That was mean. I wonder what that's all about. The second arrow is really quick, which is, God, Julia, what's the matter with you? Why are you so mean? You know better. How could you even think that? What's your problem? Lots of second arrows. What's your problem? Listen to the tone of that. Julia, I thought you knew better. Julia, what's the matter with you? Why are you so mean? Second arrows. Wow. Would you look at all of this? Instrument of peace. And being able to explore this, just stop the habitual firing off this aggression and hostility and just pause and go, wow, there's a lot here. Let me just look. That's the practice. So today, I'd like to bring forward a Japanese concept. And it's called wabi sabi. wabi-sabi. Wabi sabi. And it means beauty in that which is temporary and imperfect. Beauty in that which is temporary and imperfect. Just take that in for a minute. Beauty in that which is temporary and imperfect. So I'm going to draw a couple of parallels for us today. And the first comes from a psychiatrist, a story that I I read just yesterday in a magazine that we get at my farm called from the American Psychiatry Association called Psychiatric News. And it was a story that a psychiatrist was sharing about resilience and how, as a culture, when treating people with mental health issues, there is a propensity, a habit energy of constantly pathologizing a person for their mental health. So a person goes through a period of depression, and that depression sort of assigns some kind of pathology to an individual. And it's not that it's not true, it could be true, and yet it's not the whole truth. Somebody who is psychotic from, say, a really strong marijuana or methamphetamines, that psychosis and the actions that are associated with it become this individual's identity, and that identity is highly pathologized. Huh, would you look at that? So this psychiatrist was contemplating this, and he was discerning this, and he was taking a walk around his neighborhood, and he came across in the sidewalk in front of his house, no less, this tree, this magnificent tree that had been there for a very long time, given how big it was. And he looked down and he realized that this tree's roots were cracking and breaking the cement sidewalk. And he paused. And his first thought wasn't awe, it was annoyance. Like, oh, God. I got to fix this. It's a liability. It's a hazard. It doesn't look nice. Look at how unseemly this is. Yuck, yuck, yuck. What a hassle. What an expense. And then he paused and thought, would you look at that? That was not in the article, by the way. That was just me reading it, hearing his discernment. And he started to look at the roots. And he realized these roots, this tree, and its strength and tenacity and resilience had these gnarled roots that were not going to be tamed down or persuaded to stay quiet by this human-made concrete. And it just burst through, and they were gnarled and rough and edgy. And he looked closely at these roots and he was like, wow, look at the history of this tree and the story these roots hold with every encounter of a stone or a rock or a footprint or a weather event. All of those stories, all of those experiences etched and marked in the presentation of these roots. And still, the resiliency of this tree is forging its way through. So humbling. And the nature of this tree is to keep living, regardless of these obstacles, sometimes in spite of the obstacles, sometimes motivated and encouraged by these obstacles. So the psychiatrist calls an arborist over and he says, okay, look, I need to figure out this sidewalk. It's a hazard. So should we trim down these roots and make everything smooth and flat again? And the arborist was like, absolutely, we can do that. And you will make the tree wither. That choice, that decision will negatively impact this tree. And so this physician was like, wow, how often have I done that with my own patients? Remind them of their flaws, try to mold and shape and smooth and sterilize all of these people's imperfections to this formulated image, and in fact cause more human withering. Powerful. The physician decided not to trim the root system. And in fact, with the arborist, they cut up all of the concrete sidewalk, raised it up a little bit, and created pavers so that the roots could be seen and celebrated and given more room to expand. I love that story. And I love the creativity and the honoring of resiliency, of imperfection, the temporariness of concrete, and how nature tends to win out. Wabi sabi, beauty in that which is temporary and imperfect. So let's bring that to us. Let's bring that into a journey of recovery, shall we? And let's cultivate a little bit of awareness, and let's bring forward the adage, well, nobody's perfect. And let's dissect that a little bit. It bugs me. I can't stand that sentiment. Nobody's perfect. And I think the reason why I find that sentiment distasteful and frankly disingenuous is because of the unspoken sentiment that surrounds it, which is, at least for me, nobody's perfect. Julia, you're not perfect, but you should try to be. You should strive to be. It's an achievable endeavor. You should certainly endeavor to be more perfect than less perfect. How about that? And so every time I've ever made a mistake in my life, I create a chorus, one more addition to my inner chorus, chanting and screaming all the ways I fail to measure up, all the ways I'm flawed, all the ways I ought to harbor regret for my imperfection. This chorus of inner criticism never talks about resilience for me. It never celebrates how often I'm amazing. It rarely, if ever, knows how to balance my flaws with all of the things about me that are really rather bright and pristine. It certainly doesn't like to allow any light through my flaws and imperfections. In fact, the message that I often heard in my youth was hide that. Don't tell anybody. Don't show anybody that. And if you do, feel bad about it for the rest of your life. So I have. And I've been telling some Kalyana Mitras that for the last couple of weeks, I have been navigating some very tumultuous waters of insecurity and self-doubt. And it's been really hard. I've been very tender and weepy. It's manifested in an inability to accept praise. And I was just telling Sangha members this morning here in Soul Center that I found myself this week entertaining my inner adolescent who was like, don't touch me. Don't look at me. Don't say nice things to me. I don't deserve them. I did this when I was 9, and I did that when I was 12, and I did this when I was 13, and I did that when I was 17. And oh my God, do you remember the thing that you did when you were 21? And There's my chorus. Everybody had a solo, it seems, reminding me of the my deepest, darkest regrets and flaws and foibles and fumbles and embarrassments and humiliations, all of it so loud. And I remembered one in particular this morning as I was coming into Soul Center. When I was 14 years old, I was uprooted. I was thinking about this psychiatrist's story. So no wonder this memory came to my consciousness, came into my awareness. Would you look at that? I was 14. I was living in New England. Long time New Englander, my family. And I was uprooted and plunked down in the middle of the United States in Iowa. I had never been on a farm, like an Iowa farm. I had never seen cornfields like that. I had never seen any cowboys or anything like that. I lived in a city-like suburb of a pretty colonial environment. And here I was in the Middle West. I talked funny. I had a strange accent. I used strange words. I had a funny way of speaking. I was in the ninth grade, so I was adolescent and just 100% weird. And I did some crazy shit trying to fit in that I regret. This was the first time in the ninth grade that I ever got really intoxicated on alcohol. 14. And I made a complete fool of myself and I got into trouble. And trouble meaning somebody called my parents. And so I was ashamed. I tried to lie about it. You know, the whole thing, you can imagine the whole adolescent experience. And fortunately, the good thing that came out of it was that I never got intoxicated like that again. I knew at a very young age that was not the way to go. I didn't iron it out completely that one time. I had a couple of other run-ins with some misconduct with alcohol, but that was my first. And it was bad. And I was bad. And I was a kid. So that little kid in that chorus of inner critics came forward on my drive into Soul Center today, added to the chorus of voices speaking my flaws and imperfections that have been going on for 2 weeks. And finally, I was able to tell that younger version of myself, who's still me, by the way. And I was able to tell her, Julia, darling, look at this. You were uprooted, planted in completely foreign soil, trying to acclimate, terribly insecure, terribly doubtful, struggling to find your way. It took years for you to finally root in. No wonder you were flopping around, flailing a little bit. And look how you did this one act of resilience. You kept going and you kept growing. And I feel so confident in saying You are just like me. As a human being, you've made mistakes just like me. The details may differ, so that doesn't really matter. But because we're humans together, we have flaws. We've made mistakes. To identify that, to acknowledge that, is to not make excuses. It's to simply acknowledge and be aware. I made some serious mistakes for which I have humiliations and regrets. And I've kept going. Even if those imperfections lasted decades, even if those mistakes created loss, even if those misguided acts of misconduct created irreparable cracks, beside all of it, resilience, growth, carrying on was happening also. Would you look at all of that? That's the invitation, friends. That's the spirit of Wabi Sabi. Beauty in that which is temporary and imperfect. My chorus of flaws will live with me for the rest of my life. And sometimes it's center stage and it has really loud microphones. But in the audience are all the voices that represent the things that I've done well. And the experiences of joy and brightness and alertness and wakefulness. There are voices in there of leniency and forgiveness, voices of curiosity and creativity. They're quieter, but they're there. And together, this is the beauty of my soulful spiritual symphony. It is my life. And I dare say it's yours too, just like me. So, in some quiet time now, let's have a meditation of mindfulness so that you can have some space to acknowledge any imperfection and see if you can find the brightness that goes along with it, defining the beauty of your resilience. Breathing in, breathing out. Enjoy this time of quiet reflection. friends, to cultivate a practice of awareness that includes kindness and curiosity, compassion and understanding is an enormous act of love. And the reason is because there is some deep conditioning in the Western mind and heart that is convinced we can beat our sins, our flaws, our misgivings out of ourselves. If we're just militant enough, if we just scold ourselves repeatedly enough times, we'll wake up and get out of the hole we've dug for ourselves if we're tough enough toward ourselves. And in some instances, that might actually be successful. That might be true. And the truth is, sometimes what is calling us is attention to beauty, attention to wonder, attention to those mistakes and the missteps that we've taken, not as excuses, but as acknowledgement and acceptance for what is. This is what happened. This is the fodder in which I can use to create the fertile ground of my own growth. And sometimes I have to encounter and create that fodder over and over and over again before the ground is fertile enough for something new to grow. That's my reality. That's what is. But I can't grow it if I'm constantly bringing a pitchfork to it, and just scraping at it over and over again. Some other method has to be employed. There's a wonderful spiritual teaching that I really like, and it's about the hole in the road whenever we make mistakes. You probably know it. But it's the idea that we walk down the road and we're so unaware, we're so asleep to our lives, and we're so reactive that we just keep going down the road and there's a hole and we don't see it and we fall into the hole. And we claw our way out of the hole, and then we go on with our lives and we go down this same street, and again we don't see the hole and we fall into that hole again and again and again, until one day something shifts. We wake up a little bit and we take a different road, avoiding that hole altogether. What I'm encouraging is, at some point, let's go back to that road with a hole in it. And let's bring a ladder. Let's be that person. Because somebody's going to fall in that hole and they would really benefit from having a ladder. Or maybe buy a paving company and pave that hole. Or maybe encourage a bunch of people to bring their ladders, and the ladders fill the hole. The point is that not only can we learn from the conditions that create the misguidance, but we can, with our resiliency, change the conditions, not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of others. I feel so confident, despite all my self-doubt, in saying we were created for this. It's why we're here. And it's how we breathe love into life. Wow. We heard from so many people today with such impeccability. I'm so, so grateful. Um, one of the things that's really humbling for me is thinking about some of the imagery that we brought forward today. So we had the imagery of roots and the scarring that goes on there and the knottedness and the gnarliness and how does that live in me? How does that live in you? That's an inquiry question. We also heard from a Sangha member about a pendulum and working with duality on a pendulum. And the whole point of a spiritual practice is to make sure that we understand the duality, the nature of this two-sided thing, the good, the bad, the positive, the negative, the gain, the loss, praise, blame, so on and so forth. To understand the conditions of those two extremes well enough that the arc that we have to ride in between, that pendulum, isn't so big. We're not either like full on clinging, full on resisting. We're finding that middle way, and we're staying kind of supple in that middle way rather than these exaggerated swings, these exaggerated highs and lows. We also heard today the image of the spiral. And the image of the spiral, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most ancient symbols on the planet created by human beings. And nobody really knows why, other than there's some innate relationship that we have. There's some innate wisdom that human beings started to create and craft that recognized that things are cyclical. They go round and round, but they're not necessarily round and round exactly, repetitively. They're round and round, and each time we cycle through something, something new is gained. So just last Monday, in our Monday meditation class, I brought forward, let me see if you'll just humor me a moment so I can find it, an image of the spiral that I wanted to talk about and teach about. And so here's a circle where we go round and round and we're just doing the same thing over and over and over again, and we're not learning anything. We're just engaging in the same pattern of behavior, the same stuff over and over and over again. That's a circular way of life. A spiral way of life is here's some kind of negative habit energy, some kind of story. Procrastination is something we all know and can relate to. So there it is. And so we're going along our life and we've got some procrastination and we're circling around and then there it is again. But look, we're not in the same place because this is not that. This is a different life. This is a different moment. The conditions of right here are slightly different. But maybe it's not enough different to change everything altogether. So around and round we go. There we go. And then here it is. Oh, there it is again. And eventually, with practice, with awareness, with deeper understanding, we learn those conditions well enough to shift out of the pattern, to find a new road, to bring a ladder to the pothole, to make something new happen. It takes time, it takes patience and creativity, curiosity, leniency, peace, love. It takes all of those virtues. Sometimes it takes a taskmaster. Sometimes we need a little, get going. Come on, enough's enough. Let's do it. We can do it. Urgh. Sometimes that helps, but it can't be the only voice in your spiritual symphony. You have to cultivate enough of an ear to hear all the instruments in your symphony. And then you really get to live the fullness of your life, which is full of beauty and impermanence, right? Imperfection, karma, and so on. Friends, let's go ahead and end our practice with a couple of announcements, and that is that we meet tomorrow morning for Monday morning meditation. You can join us for that if you'd like to. Lo will put the link in our chat. And we meet every Monday morning, and we're meeting sort of monthly, and we're working with topics related to improving mental health. And so for the month of February, we've been exploring the conditions of stress and how can we work with stress. So if you'd like to join us, you can register for that. We meet Monday evening at 6 p.m. for our Recovery Dharma practice. We're going to continue to explore the Four Noble Truths, really understanding, really cultivating a practice where we can look at the causes and conditions of what makes us so uncomfortable in life, as well as what would bring us joy, what would bring ease to that discomfort. We won't gain access to that if we don't first acknowledge it. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like what's happening. I don't like myself in this process. Now, what can I do to bring ease? What are some of the conditions that I can shift? We have so much agency. We have so much power. We just have to find our resilience and our creativity to engage it. So we'll continue those explorations. Email me with any questions or concerns. Email me with your mailing address if you'd like to receive a bookmark handmade by one of our wonderful Sangha members. I'm happy to send that to you. If you'd like to make a Dana offering, you can. Financial Dana offerings are always so helpful. It really does help keep the lights on. It helps contribute to the insurance that we pay, the rent that we pay, all the things, all the overhead. But Dana isn't just money. People send us candles and they send us handmade things all the time. And don't forget the generosity of your presence. That is a gift, and it's enough. Friends, come back to a noble posture. And today we heard from one of our wonderful Sangha members about impermanence and how it's always there. Everything is subject to change. Do you know it's considered in Buddhism one of the four noble reminders? The nature of reality is impermanent. A noble reminder. Everything is subject to change. We have the agency to look at the causes and conditions of what we can change, what we can't change. We have the agency and the power to look at our repetitive habit energy and to make slight little shifts, particularly if our habit energy is a source of our own discomfort and dis-ease. We're in charge in so many ways. And bringing forward a little more gentleness, a little more leniency, some patience, some kind self-talk, a little bit of curiosity and wonder. To remember that we have an ally in time. Wow. These are faithful companions and acts of mercy that create conditions for the limitless nature of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and freedom. May you take this in not only at the level of your mind, but deep in the level of the heart. And may you enjoy the rest of your day heart-led and see what subtle change that brings. On Wednesday, we meet again for our final conversation on the mindfulness practice of awareness, and we're going to focus our entire time on the cultivation of meditation and awareness meditation. So I hope you can join me for that. Until then, friends, have a wonderful day, a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for blessing this space. Namaste.